I'm a high school freshman, so I'm 16 years old now. This story happened during the second week of Easter break in 2023, when I was still 15. It took place at my mother's house. At the time, she had decided to renovate the kitchen because it was very old-fashioned. A blond man with blue eyes came over to begin the work, which involved putting up plastic sheets along the kitchen walls and installing a divider in the living room, which is connected to the kitchen. Later that day, I had to go to the dentist to pick up a dental impression. My mom had told me the worker would be back in about an hour and a half. But since the appointment was just a quick pickup, we came home after only 45 minutes. On the way back, my mom suggested we stop to get kebabs and that we could also do a good deed by giving the worker a ride to the train station. When I got back to offer him the ride, I noticed he seemed kind of anxious. He forced a nervous smile like he was pretending everything was fine. I insisted he join us, and he agreed. On the drive, he told us his name was Brian and that he was originally from Moldova. He also said he lived alone in Paris, while his 2 children were still in his home country. We dropped him at the station, picked up our food, and went home. After eating, I decided to take a bath. I do that often because I enjoy it, but this time the hot water ran out. I ended up soaking in lukewarm water for nearly 2 hours. When I got out and returned to my room upstairs, I immediately noticed something strange. My computer was on and showing the lock screen wallpaper, even though I was absolutely sure I had shut it down before going for my bath. I asked my mom if she'd been in my room or used my PC, but she said no and that she'd stayed in her room watching the news. I quickly checked around my room but found nothing out of place, so I eventually just went to sleep. At 5 a.m., I woke up drenched in sweat and shaking badly, something that had never happened to me before. I had this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong, like there was someone nearby. I grabbed one of my knives, yes, a little intense, but I collect blades like knives, katanas, and shurikens, and I have them displayed on my bedroom wall. I searched the room again but didn't find anything. Still, the uneasy feeling stayed with me. I locked the door and texted my mom to see if she felt anything weird too, but she didn't respond. I waited 3 hours until I finally heard her moving around. She came to check on me, and I explained what I'd experienced. She said I was probably just paranoid and reassured me everything was okay. She also told me that Brian would be back at 10 a.m. to continue working and that she'd be going to work, so I'd be alone with him. She mentioned that he didn't need to ring the bell because she told him where we kept the spare keys, in the woodshed next to the front door. Then she left for work. I went back to bed, locking the door again. I didn't wake up until 11:30 a.m. and went down to the basement to cook since the kitchen was still under renovation. I didn't see Brian, but I didn't really think much of it. When I went back upstairs, I ran into him, and that horrible gut feeling instantly returned. He started talking to me, but I cut the conversation short and quickly went back to my locked room. About 10 minutes later, he knocked on my door asking for help carrying something. I stayed silent. I really didn't want to be near him again. Then, to my horror, he started trying to open my door and even began kicking it hard. My first reaction was to grab another knife and lock myself in the bathroom inside my room. I called the police in a panic and explained what was happening. The operator said she was dispatching 2 cars, which would arrive in 10 minutes. As I waited, Brian managed to get into my room and began pounding on the bathroom door. I told him I had called the police and that they were almost there. I also warned him I had a knife and would defend myself. Once he heard that, he stopped banging and left the room. The police arrived just in time and caught Brian trying to flee. My mom came home right away, hugged me, and burst into tears, saying she should have trusted my instincts. A few days later, the police called us with an update. Brian had been charged with attempted kidnapping, identity theft, torture, and even murder. I believe that strange feeling I had in the middle of the night was him sneaking back into the house, knowing exactly where the spare key was. He's in prison now, and I hope I never have to see him again. This is the story of how my spoiled, entitled Little Brother Messed with My Food, and Got Away with It. I've got a bunch of stories about him that I'll share in separate posts, but out of all of them, this one is easily the worst. None of the other incidents even come close to this level, which is why it still shocks me to this day. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was 12. I was back in Belgium for Easter, visiting family. I was making myself some soup and needed to use the bathroom. Before going, I asked my younger brother Marcus, who was probably around 9 or 10 at the time, to keep an eye on it for a minute. Typical Marcus, though. He flat out refused unless I paid him. Even as a kid, he was always trying to squeeze money out of situations. I told him I'd only be gone for a minute and headed off anyway. When I came back, he was gone. That annoyed me, but I didn't think too much of it. I went ahead and ate the soup, then went to practice a new song with my band. I was working on the bass line for girls and boys for maybe 5 minutes before things took a turn. Suddenly, I started feeling really sick, dizzy, pounding headache, and intense stomach pain. A few minutes later, I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. And that was just the beginning. I was vomiting for the rest of the day, barely able to sit upright because the pain in my stomach was so severe. I even ended up in tears, it was that bad. The entire next day, I was trying not to puke or have an accident at the same time. I have a serious garlic allergy, so I checked the soup to make sure there hadn't been garlic in it. There wasn't, but I didn't even need to check, because a few hours later, Marcus came and admitted the truth. Turns out, while I was in the bathroom, he deliberately put garlic in my soup. He said he was curious to see what would happen. At first, I assumed my parents must have made him confess, but nope, he came clean on his own, like it was just some experiment. Through a mix of dry heaving, burping, and barely holding myself together, I told my mom what happened. She already knew I was seriously ill, but she didn't realize Marcus was the cause. Her reaction? Not great. She told me it was probably just a mistake, an innocent accident, and reminded me that he was still just a kid. So yeah, nothing happened to him. No punishment. No apology. Meanwhile, I was in agony for days. To this day, he still hasn't said sorry. And now I make absolutely sure he's nowhere near the kitchen whenever I'm making anything. I had just gotten back from a sleepover at a friend's house early in the morning. The neighborhood was still quiet, the sun barely up, and I was kind of looking forward to the peace, just making myself some breakfast like I usually do when I have the house to myself. My parents had gone away for the weekend, and the plan was that I'd get home Sunday morning and relax. At least, that's what I thought would happen. As soon as I turned the corner and saw the front gate wide open, I froze. It was gently swinging in the breeze. I know I shut and latched it before leaving. It's not the kind that opens on its own, you have to pull it hard and listen for the latch to click. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering if maybe my dad had left it open before they left, but he's always extra careful about things like that. Still, I tried to convince myself maybe they were rushing out. I stepped into the yard. The grass was damp with morning dew, but everything looked normal, no mess, no strange footprints. Still, something felt off. That uneasiness started creeping up in my chest. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not bad, but off. Like the air had changed, like something had been moved or disturbed. I paused in the hallway and looked around. The lights were off, nothing broken, but the air felt heavy. I walked into the living room and noticed it right away. A small latch on one of the side windows was snapped clean off, the broken piece still dangling by the screw. That window is always locked, especially when no one's home. A chill ran through me. Someone had either tried to break in or had gotten in. I checked the other windows quickly, nothing else seemed wrong, but that broken latch said enough. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He answered, but the signal was terrible, his voice kept cutting out. I told him something was wrong at the house, but the call dropped before I could say more. Tried calling again, straight to voicemail. I started pacing, phone in hand, debating whether I should call the police or wait. I tried to tell myself maybe my dad broke the latch doing repairs and forgot to mention it. But it didn't sit right. I locked the front door from the inside and double-checked the back one, trying to calm down. I figured maybe if I just closed the gate, I'd feel a little more in control. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my shoes, and went outside again. The gate squeaked louder now in the early wind. I walked up to it, hands out to grab and shut it, but just as I reached for the latch, I heard it. The sound of our front door opening behind me. It was quiet, but I heard it clearly. Slow. Careful. I froze. My heart jumped. I turned around slowly. Standing in the doorway was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s maybe, wearing a dark gray work jacket and cargo pants, boots caked in dirt. In one hand, he held a thick black folder, like the kind a building inspector or contractor might carry. He didn't move. Just stood there, eyes on me. And I could tell right away, he hadn't expected me to be there. His expression changed just for a second, surprised, not scared. Then he smoothed it over like nothing was wrong. I didn't move. Still by the open gate. I tried to keep my voice calm. Can I help you? Who are you looking for? He took a step forward, slow and casual. I just wanted to talk to your dad, he said, voice low and steady, almost too steady. Is he home? He was trying too hard to seem relaxed. No twitching, no sweating, but his stillness was almost unnatural. I saw his hand tighten a little around the folder. I shook my head. They're not here. He nodded once. That's fine. I can wait. I said nothing. He didn't come any closer, just stood halfway in, halfway out, like he wasn't sure whether to come forward or back off. I still had my hand on the gate, and without looking away, I started pulling it closed. I kept talking to him, trying to get him to say more, hoping for some kind of clue as to what he was really doing here. Eventually, he admitted he used to work with my dad. That's when his tone shifted, went from neutral to bitter. He said he got let go for some stupid reason he didn't want to explain. But the way his jaw tightened, the way his voice dipped lower, it was clear he held a grudge. A deep one. He said my dad didn't even have the guts to fire him face to face, just sent someone else. He wasn't yelling, but his anger was obvious, simmering just below the surface. I nodded along, pretending I got it. Yeah, that sounds rough. I said things like, there's probably been a misunderstanding. Just anything to keep him calm. Then he said it. So casually it took a second to sink in. I've been watching your house. Just trying to figure out the right time. Thought Easter weekend might be it, figured everyone would be gone. That was it. No more guessing. This wasn't an accident or misunderstanding, he planned this. I nodded like it didn't matter. Yeah, holidays are weird. People coming and going all the time. He didn't even flinch, just kept talking. I told him my dad would be back soon, that they could talk it out. He seemed to relax a little at that, even smiled faintly when I said I understood how unfair things can feel. All the while, I slowly started inching sideways toward the fence dividing our yard from the neighbors. Just a step or two at a time, like I was pacing. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. My phone was still inside, I'd left it in the hallway. That meant no way to call anyone unless I physically reached someone. He was too caught up in his rant to notice me moving. Talking about job sites and how everything changed when my dad started enforcing rules, deadlines, procedures. I reached the back corner of the yard and squatted down by the gate hinge, pretending to examine it. Hold on, I said. Looks like this lock's busted. Been like that since last week, I think. He glanced over his shoulder, barely interested. And in that second, I bolted. I sprinted to the neighbor's gate, grabbed the latch, stuck. I shoved it hard, it gave way, and I flew through, stumbling over uneven ground and racing to their back door. I banged on it with both fists, over and over. Didn't look back. After what felt like forever, but was probably 10 seconds, a man in his 70s opened up. I didn't hesitate. "There's a man in our house." I panted. "He broke in, said he worked with my dad. Please, he's still there." The man's face hardened instantly. He pulled me inside and locked the door. Without wasting a second, he grabbed his landline and called the police. I heard him give our address and say, "There's an intruder next door. My neighbor's daughter ran here, he's still in the house." I crouched by the window, barely breathing, listening for any sign he'd followed, but it was silent. Too silent. Police showed up under 10 minutes. I watched from the kitchen as 2 officers crossed our lawn carefully. Another cruiser pulled up. But the man was gone. They searched everywhere, inside, the yard, even the alley behind the shed. Nothing. Later, they found him hiding in a trailer just 2 blocks away. Inside, they discovered photos of our house, my parents, even me. Notes. Logs. Days and times he'd been watching. He'd been planning this for weeks. He told police he never intended to hurt anyone, just wanted back what he thought was taken from him. But clearly, something in his mind had snapped. He believed we owed him. When my parents came home and heard what happened, they were shaken. My mom cried for hours. My dad hardly said a word. The detective told me if I hadn't gotten away when I did, things could have gone a lot worse. Now, I check the gate every time I come home. I double lock every window, even in broad daylight. And I still think about that Easter morning. How it could have been so easy to believe him. He looked normal. He sounded calm. But that day changed everything. And honestly, home hasn't felt quite the same since. Easter morning kicked off with an unexpected gift from my dad, a small motion sensor camera. I've always had a thing for gadgets, so I was pretty pumped and immediately started brainstorming ways we could use it. After a bit of back and forth, we decided to mount it above the front door on the outside. That way, we could monitor who came by in real time, whether it was packages, neighbors, or random visitors. We figured it would help us stay on top of things. We installed it that afternoon. It was a sleek, compact black model, so small that unless you were looking closely, you wouldn't notice it. The app on my phone showed the live feed, and I set it to record whenever it detected movement. The first few days were uneventful, with recordings mostly of us going about our usual routines, me leaving for school, my dad returning from work, my mom watering the plants, typical stuff. But on the 3rd morning, I checked the feed and found a few new clips from the night before. At first, I thought it was just a cat or maybe the wind blowing something in the yard. But one of the clips froze me in place. There was someone standing at the door, no knocking, no sound, just standing there staring at it for several minutes. The clip started around 2:41 a.m. and showed the person barely moving, just standing there with their hands in their hoodie pocket, staring at the door. It was too dark to make out any features, but I could see the outline of a hood and baggy clothes. After nearly 6 minutes, the person suddenly turned and walked out of frame. I showed my parents, and we all stared at the screen in silence for a while. My mom thought it might be a confused neighbor or someone with the wrong address. My dad didn't say much, but I could tell he wasn't as relaxed as usual. He replayed the video several times. He's usually calm, so seeing him uneasy made me feel uneasy too. That night, I checked the footage again, but there was nothing new. However, the next day I found another clip, taken at almost the same time, 2:43 a.m. This time, the figure was there for longer, about 20 minutes. Same stance, same clothes, same behavior, just standing there, no knocking, just silent. We sent the video to a family friend who works in private security. He watched it and texted back saying we should save all the recordings and call the police if the person came back. He said it was unusual for someone to loiter like that at such a late hour without trying to make contact, and he advised us not to ignore it. The video quality wasn't great, just enough to see the figure's outline in the dim light. It was always the same, a person in a hoodie, standing still on the porch, then walking off to the left, toward the main street. I started asking the neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange. Most of them hadn't, but Mrs. Glasser, the woman next door, said she'd heard footsteps outside her window around 3 a.m. a few times over the past 2 weeks. She'd assumed it was someone coming home late or walking their dog, though no one in the neighborhood had large dogs, and nobody else mentioned seeing anyone unfamiliar. By now, I was checking the camera every morning before even brushing my teeth. We weren't sleeping well. Even though nothing had happened, the idea that someone was silently watching our front door, standing there without knocking or speaking, started to get under our skin. It didn't feel like someone lost or confused anymore, it felt deliberate. That weekend, my dad went to the hardware store and came back with a new door chain and an extra bolt. He spent part of Sunday afternoon installing them. It wasn't that we expected someone to try to break in, but he said we'd sleep better knowing we had the extra security. I started checking the camera more frequently, not just in the mornings, but also in the middle of the night. I'd lie awake and watch the live feed on my phone for a few minutes at a time. The camera gave a clear view of the front step, part of the street, and a section of our garden, so I knew every crack in the concrete, every rustle of the bushes. If anything changed, I'd notice. The third night, I stayed at my cousin's house. My parents were home alone, and of course, I forgot to switch out the memory card in the camera before leaving. It had filled up the day before, so that night, it didn't record anything. We didn't realize how bad that timing was until the next morning. My dad called me early, his voice sharp, nothing like usual. He said something had happened to the door. When I got home later that day, I saw it myself. The lock was scratched up, badly, deep grooves around the keyhole as if someone had tried to force it open. The new bolt we installed was scuffed too, as if someone had yanked it hard and then gave up. There had been no break-in, but someone had definitely tried. We called the police immediately. 2 officers came by, took pictures, and asked a lot of questions. Did we have any enemies? Anyone who might want to scare us? Anything unusual lately? We showed them the earlier recordings, though they hadn't captured anything from that night. The officers took a copy and told us to keep documenting anything strange. One officer suggested it could be someone trying to intimidate us or possibly testing the house to see if it was an easy target. After they left, the atmosphere in the house changed. My mom barely said a word the rest of the evening. My dad stayed downstairs longer than usual, pacing near the front door. I replaced the memory card, double-checked the camera, and put in a second one in the window facing the opposite direction. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, after lunch, our neighbor across the street called. He said he'd seen someone hanging around our fence, walking slowly, stopping like they were checking something. I grabbed my jacket and went outside, scanning up and down the block. I didn't expect to see anything, but then, at the far end of the yard, I saw a blur of gray behind the hedge. The second I looked directly at him, the figure jumped over the low part of our fence and took off toward the alley. I shouted and tried to follow, but he was already out of reach. My dad came running out behind me, phone in hand. We called the police again, and this time, the patrol car showed up quickly, less than 5 minutes. We gave them the direction he ran, and one of the officers jogged down the block toward the intersection. A few minutes later, he came back leading someone in handcuffs. I recognized him right away. It took me a second, but I knew that face. It was Pete, our old neighbor. He used to live 2 doors down from us and had a reputation for throwing loud parties, arguing with his girlfriend, and causing scenes late at night. A year ago, someone had called the landlord enough times that Pete was evicted. My dad had filed one of the complaints after Pete cursed at my mom for asking him to turn down the music. I hadn't seen him since, but now here he was, caught sneaking around our yard. The officers kept him in the car while they asked us questions. Pete didn't say anything at first, just stared straight ahead. When they drove him off, one officer said they'd let us know what came of it later. That night, we got a call from the station. Pete had confessed to creeping around our house on purpose. He admitted he was the one in the footage, standing at the door. He said he wanted to scare us and mess with us because he was still angry about being kicked out. The scratches on the lock. That was him too. He wasn't planning to steal anything, he just wanted us to feel unsafe. They also found a bag near where Pete had been hiding. Inside, there were gloves, a box cutter, a folded note, and a bottle of lighter fluid. He hadn't used them yet, but the police took it seriously. Pete told them he was still thinking about what to do next, but he liked watching us react. That hit me the hardest, knowing that every night, while we sat inside feeling watched, he was actually out there, hiding behind fences, waiting. He said it all started with that noise complaint my dad had written to the landlord. Pete figured we were the reason he got evicted. Maybe he wasn't completely wrong, but we never imagined anyone would take it that far. I kept thinking back to the mornings when I'd seen him months earlier, nodding at us like everything was normal. Nothing about him then made me think he could be capable of this. The officers told us he was charged with attempted breaking and entering, stalking, and possession of tools with intent to commit a crime. They said we did the right thing by calling early and setting up the camera. Easter used to be a quiet, peaceful time for us, just food, family, and a long weekend. This year, it turned into sleepless nights and locked doors. I was lucky I love tech. That camera likely stopped something much worse from happening. Now, I double-check all the locks before bed, keep the yard lights on all night, and every morning, before anything else, I open the app and check the front door feed. You never know who might be watching. This happened a few years ago when I visited my family for Easter. At the time, I was living on my own, but since my grandmother's birthday was in April, we always had a small get-together for both Easter and her birthday. This year, I was bringing my girlfriend, Whitney, who I'd been with for almost a year, so she could meet my family. We were both pretty excited about it. My grandparents lived in a quiet neighborhood that felt like a retirement community. Their place was more like a condo, though it felt more like a house. It was a nice area, with their neighbors being typical retired folks, friendly, but they mostly kept to themselves. I'd spent a lot of time there when I was younger, so I had fond memories of the place. We arrived around Sunday afternoon, a little earlier than expected, and my parents were already there. I introduced Whitney to my grandparents, and we all sat around chatting. Soon after, my siblings showed up, and with the kids running around, my grandparents were excited to hide eggs for the Easter hunt. Afterward, we had dinner and spent the evening relaxing while the kids dug into their Easter baskets. At one point, my grandpa, Dad, and I were sitting in the living room talking when we heard a soft tapping sound on the door. We paused to listen, thinking maybe one of the kids was playing around, but when it happened again, my dad got up to see who it was. He opened the door, but there was no one there. We figured it was probably just someone messing around and went back to our conversation. But then, a few minutes later, the tapping came again. My dad shouted into the kitchen to ask where the kids were, and my mom said they were outside with my sister and Whitney. So, my dad went into the kitchen to talk to her, and I stayed in the living room with my grandpa. After a moment of silence, Whitney walked in and asked me what the knocking sound was. I was surprised at first, as she mentioned hearing the same 5 taps that we'd heard, but she said it sounded much louder to her and startled her and my sister. I realized something was off when I started talking to others. My mom and grandma in the kitchen hadn't heard anything, and neither had my brother, who was in the bathroom, or my brother-in-law, who had been out front. But Whitney and my sister heard a loud banging from the back, while we only heard a quieter tapping. It was strange that the sound was different depending on where people were, and yet, some didn't hear anything at all. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just one of those odd things. As the evening went on and it started getting darker, we had the back screen door open because it felt nice outside. Then, we all heard the knocking again. This time, everyone looked toward the door. My grandpa made a joke about my sister-in-law being late, and we all laughed a bit as he walked to the door again. But when he opened it, there was no one there. He looked around outside, came back in, and seemed confused. We'd all heard the knock, but there was no one there. My grandma tried to brush it off as a prank, but my dad wasn't so sure. He said he wanted to go outside to look around. My brother-in-law agreed to go with him, and they shut the door behind them. Then, things got a lot more intense. After a few minutes, we were all startled by a loud, blood-curdling scream. It sounded like someone was screaming for their life. We all jumped up, looking at each other to make sure everyone was okay. My brother immediately ran for the door, and I followed closely behind, worried that something might have happened outside. When we stepped outside, I saw no one in the front yard, and the street seemed clear except for a few parked cars. That's when we heard it again, a loud, piercing scream. But this time, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I called out for my dad in a panic as I saw him and my brother-in-law approaching from the front yard. They had heard the second scream, but they hadn't heard the first one, which seemed strange to me since it had been so clear inside the house. They said they'd walked around the condo but hadn't seen anything. They told us to go back inside and call the police while they continued to check the area. I ran inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the police, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. It felt like an eternity before they showed up, though it hadn't been that long. My dad and brother-in-law talked to them first and explained everything. 2 officers came, and they called for a few more to help check the surrounding area. They told us all to stay inside, but my brother-in-law didn't leave the front stoop. Now, things took another strange turn. The officers asked each of us exactly what we heard and where we thought the sound had come from. Most of us described the same thing, but when it came to the direction, my dad and brother-in-law said they only heard the second scream and thought it came from the front yard. The rest of us thought it sounded like it came from the back. I couldn't pinpoint the direction, it had felt like the scream was right in front of me. The police decided to go ask around the neighborhood, since surely someone else must have heard something. But when they came back, they said that all the neighbors they talked to hadn't heard a thing, not even the knocking or tapping we'd experienced. They'd also checked for any signs of someone outside, footprints, marks on windows, anything, but found nothing. The officers drove around the area, but came back empty-handed. They told us to call again if anything else happened, and then they left. We were all left in disbelief. The strange events had completely killed the mood, and soon everyone began heading home. My mom later told me that after we left, they started hearing what sounded like someone pounding on a window. But again, there was no trace of anyone outside. There were no footprints, no smudges on the windows, nothing. My grandma got worried, and my dad didn't want to leave them alone, so they ended up staying the night. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night. We kept an eye on the news, hoping there would be a report about someone in trouble in the area, but there was nothing. My grandma even spoke to some of the neighbors, but they all said they hadn't heard anything. It was a strange, unsettling experience, and though nothing else ever happened in the area, it spooked my grandma enough that she decided to move a year later. To this day, no one has an explanation for the screaming or the knocking, but I can't shake the feeling that something really unsettling happened that night.